Hi, welcome to Grafted, Jewish Roots of Christianity. I'm your host, Stephanie Pavlantos. Thank you for joining me today. So my guest today is Laura Lee. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you being here and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for inviting me to share my story.
You're welcome. And I'm going to give you a little information about Laura Lee, and then she can fill in the blanks that I may have left out. So Laura Lee is a modern-day Samaritan woman dedicated to guiding others towards the healing and freedom she found through Yeshua. Like the woman at the well from John 4, she was seen by God, confronted, and set free by Messiah. And now she shares her story to testify to his transformative power. Her empathy for others comes from her journey through shame and despair, where Yeshua met her, understood her struggles, and healed her. Combining her personal experience with her professional background in chemical dependency counseling and certifications in peer recovery and substance abuse, Laura Lee offers both compassionate understanding and expert guidance to those seeking healing. So, wow. You and I have talked quite a bit on the phone and had some awesome conversations, and I know that even what you shared with me is only a little bit of your story, and there's a lot to it. So I look forward to hearing more and just, having this discussion about Yeshua and his power over shame and guilt, because those things are huge in people's lives. And so, but anything else you would like to share that wasn't in your bio?
So, I'm also certified as a post-abortion advocate,
Okay.
and I've taken training also as a domestic violence advocate. And I'm gearing up to finish my certification as a mental health coach.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. And you lead several retreats, right? Or at least one, if not more. But you're getting, and as we talked before, you're even getting into the whole nutritional aspect of healing and all of that as well. So what are some of the conference titles that you've had, or that I know you've gone to some and then you host some?
So, the Father had me host Good Samaritan Leadership Conference a few years ago, and we're hoping to pull together another leadership conference. And after that conference, then he directed me to develop a Good Samaritan Women's Retreat, which is creating a small, safe space for women to come and to deal with their trauma. And so I have some really amazing therapists and coaches that are part of my team, and an amazing hospitality team also, because we love good food, right? And so our next retreat, we're hoping to incorporate nutrition, because it's all interrelated.
It
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And you have a show, or do you call it a podcast, or is it a show? I mean, I
So
guess
it's a
you could call it.
podcast on Hebrew Nation Radio.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
called Healing for the I'm sorry. It's called Healing for the Nations with a Modern-Day Samaritan Woman.
Okay. All right. I've forgotten the name of it. So yeah, and I'll leave links for that on the show notes so people can find it. You've been married. You've had a rough marriage, and I know that you've been married more than once, and there was domestic violence in those marriages, or at least in one or so. So do you want to start there, or does it go back even more? I think you even told me it goes back even before that.
So I have a really long story, and I like to start where I hit a really rough bottom. And that
Okay.
was after my fourth marriage. I was married to a person that was brilliant and appeared to be pursuing a relationship with a father. And there was various addictions involved, and there was a demonic realm. And when I tell my story, bits and pieces of just that, what I survived, it blows my mind that I actually lived to tell. And I've heard similar stories. And when it comes to domestic abuse, there's domestic abuse and then there's narcissistic abuse.
Mhm.
And Lundy Bancroft writes a book, Why Does He Do That? And in that book, he breaks down the different modalities of domestic abusers, how they operate. And he has one paragraph for narcissists because that's a totally different animal. So, right around 2014, I left my last husband for the third time. He again told me to get out of his house. And by that point in time, I had a safety plan in place. And I had been working with local domestic violence agencies. And so I ended up getting an apartment through the domestic violence program. I lost everything. I had been raised a Seventh-day Adventist, and I lost everything. I lost all my friends. I even lost my dog. And I found myself in this little teeny weeny apartment.
Yes.
And the turning point was when I was crying out to the Father. And I started crying out to the Father, you know, you know, you know, you know. I didn't even know how to pray anymore. I had relapsed. I found myself in the hood in Syracuse, New York, getting crack cocaine. I mean, I've worked as an addictions counselor for a number of years, and here I'm in the hood getting crack cocaine, letting strange men in the back of my car, giving them hundreds of dollars to take me to the crack house. And so there was a lot of things that were happening right around the same time. And so I'm crying out to the Father, where are your real people? Where are the people that love you, keep your Sabbath, keep your commandments? Where are your real people? And then I started asking him, what does the Hebrew roots of your word mean? I don't even know what your word means. I don't want anything to do with Christianity, but I want to know what the Hebrew roots of your word means. So then one day I'm like, Hebrew roots? What the heck? I don't even know what I'm praying. So I Googled Hebrew roots, Enrico Cortez pops up. So I grab my Bible and I'm asking the Father to protect me from being deceived. So I'm listening to Rico Cortez unpack, I think it was Galatians. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what the word really means. We've been lied to. So then I was led to this little country church that taught Torah. So I went there one day. The Holy Spirit kept telling me to go, and I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm done with church. I don't want anything to do with Christians. But I kept feeling impressed to go to this little country church. So I walk in and they're doing an altar call. And I find myself going up front. And the pastor, who's never met me before, he looks at me, he puts his hands on me, and he says, he knows, he knows, he knows, he knows. What am I crying? You know, you know, you know. And then he starts speaking things over me that only the Father knew. The associate pastor came over, put his hands on me, and he said, daughter of the Most High God, it's time for you to come out of the dark. It's time for you to start speaking and writing again. So that was my church for a while. I learned Torah, in the feast days, and I went to Sukkot, my first Sukkot, and then I was led to go someplace to get deliverance because you don't walk where I've walked without picking up some unsavory character, shall
Yes.
we say, hitchhikers. And so there was like a period of time where he just amped up the healing, the deliverance. And part of that was my and I, we were studying this book called Deep Wounds, Deeper Healing. And it was all about healing the inner child, right? Inviting Jesus into those places that the trauma occurred when you were a little child.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I left her house. I was so angry. And I said to the father, I don't want anything to do with this book anymore. Are you trying to tell me that I have this little girl inside of me? It's sabotaging my life, because what a bunch of crap that is, right? If that's true, then I want you to show me. So a couple of days later, I'm cleaning my bedroom, and I always tell people, remember, his word's supernatural, his kingdom is supernatural. So I'm cleaning my bedroom, and I feel impressed to pick up the stuffed lamb that a former mentor had gifted me with. And this is going to sound crazy. So I picked up this lamb, and I'm looking at the lamb, and something really deep inside of me broke. No amount of therapy was able to take me to a place that I was led to that day. And I dropped to my knees, and I saw Yeshua. And I'm like, I have lost my mind. I'm fighting it tooth and nail. And he keeps telling me, Lauralee, I want you to focus. I want you to focus. And then I saw in my mind's eye this little girl. And he says, I want you to look at her. Look at her. And I'm fighting it with everything within me. I really thought that I've lost my mind. And he kept saying to me, I want you to stop, and I want you to focus on her. Do you see how innocent she is? How beautiful, how innocent she is? That's you. That's your authentic self before all the trauma, all the abuse. And then he took me step by step through all this trauma that had happened to me, being beaten as a little girl. And he said to me, this is where you learn to take beatings from men. This is where you learned it's your fault that you deserve to be beaten. This is where, I was molested. This is where you learned that sex is love. And this is where you learn to give yourself away for crumbs of affection and attention. And scenes from being at the dinner table, my father just grilling me every night, what I learned at school, and where I've frozen trauma in. And he said, this is where you learned that you weren't good enough, that you weren't intelligent. And part of my story is I ended up going to Wells College, an Ivy League college, scholarship, because I had a high GPA, which showed me that was a lie, that I wasn't inferior in intelligence because I was a woman. Part of my family history that I found as I was seeking understanding my identity was my great uncle was a Yale University professor. My great grandmother graduated from Harvard, and my other great uncle was a Cornell University professor, and I went to Wells College, which is associated with, it's a sister college of Cornell. So anyways, back to the lamb story. So he took me through all this trauma, and he's showing me how it shaped me. But that's not who I was. Those were survival skills. Those were defense mechanisms. Those were that's the programming that I had growing up, because I ended up deeply involved in addictions of all sorts, street drugs, alcohol of all sorts. I ended up, hanging out with Harley riders. And I mean, I took a long walk on the wild side. And so then he started speaking into me who he created me to be. And he told me nobody, no human being gets to tell you who you are. I knit you together in your mother's womb. And I called you forth to be a speaker, to be a writer. And so when he was finished speaking to me, I peeled myself up off the floor because by this time I'm on my face. It's totally on my face. So I went to my friend's house and I walked in and she knows me really well and she's like, "What is wrong? What happened?" And so I told her about it and I said, it's finally happened. I finally lost my mind. She's known me for 25 years. She's seen me go through 3 divorces, the death of my son, and all sorts of things that I went through with all my husbands. And so I told her that I've lost my mind, and she said, "No, you didn't. When you texted me this morning and asked me what book we should study again, I asked the Father what he wanted us to study, and I went to my bookshelf, and this is the book that I chose, and this is what I opened up to." And it was a quote by Charles Kraft, and it says that the inner child makes no sense to the intellectual mind because it's spiritual, it's not intellectual. And right around the same time, one day I kept hearing Hebrew Nation Radio, Hebrew Nation Radio. And I'm like, what is Hebrew Nation Radio? So I Googled it, and here is Hebrew Nation Radio, and the wise guys are talking about why there's so much infighting in the Hebrew roots movement. And I thought to myself, well, that's easy. It's all sibling rivalry. And they were offering the Way DVD, and I heard it was like a really great DVD, and I thought to myself, boy, I would really love that DVD. And they were offering it to first-time callers, but I'm like, I am not calling in. And then they were also asking people to write Daniel Holdings an email congratulating him on his new position as program manager. And I kept feeling prompted to call in. And I'm like, I don't want to call in, but I want that DVD. So I finally called in. And I thought to myself, well, there's no way I'm going to get on the air. Well, I was on the air immediately. So I gave them my 2 cents, and they're like, well, that's really interesting. We never thought about that. So when they called me to get my address to ship the DVD, I had this really great discussion with whoever it was that called me. And I told my background and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, wow, people really need to hear what you have to say. And I'm eye rolling, whatever. So I wrote Daniel Holdings an email, which is out of character for me. And I elaborated on my background and so a few days later, I got the DVD and I was so excited about that. And then I packed to go to Florida to vacation at my parents'. And when I got to Florida, there was an event that occurred with someone who I thought was a good friend. And so it led me to look into past emails. And believe it or not, at that point in time, I had never checked my spam mail ever. For some reason, I checked my spam mail, and there is a response from Daniel Holdings wanting me to call him. And it just happened that he gave me the date of the following day. I'm like, this is very interesting. So I called Daniel, and we're chit-chatting, and we're talking about the state of the messy antics, what's going on in the body, all the sibling rivalry, the infighting. And so I decided that I was going to take my chances, and I told him my lamb story. That's what I call it, my lamb story. And he's like, hold up, hold up. And I thought for sure he was going to tell me, you need to check yourself into the latest your local rehab or something, right? He says, I want you to pray about this. I want to ask you if you would be willing to do your own show because people need to hear what you have to say. And so I'm like, okay, well, when I got off the phone, I called a friend of mine who's a writer and speaker. And now, a week before I talked to Daniel, I kept hearing, I'm going to launch you. I am going to launch you. I'm like, what? I am going to launch you. I have lost my mind. This is crazy. So I called my friend, Debbie, and I, told Debbie what was going on. And she says, oh, he's launching you. Like, my stars. So Daniel calls me back and he said, we need a guest to come on Monday. And we would like you to be a guest on our show Monday. I'm like, okay, just came out of my mouth. Okay, sure, fine. So I get off the phone with Daniel and I said to the father, oh my goodness, if you really want me to go on the show, then I need you to provide a quiet, safe place for me to do this radio show because I'm staying at this, little tiny place with my mom and dad. Well, my mother's neighbor came over to her and asked my mother if she thought I would like to use her she shed. And so she showed me her she shed, and it was a private place with the most comfortable desk chair. It was perfect. So I'm doing this live 2-hour show with Daniel Holdings and Al McCorn. And Daniel says to Al, oh, guess what? What? We've got a brand new show coming on. Really? What's the name of it? I don't know. Laura Lee, what is the name of your show? No clue. I'm like, just like shout up this SOS prayer to the Father. And it just came out of my mouth, healing for the nations with a modern-day Samaritan woman. And that's how I ended up on Hebrew Nation Radio.
Wow.
Yes.
That's an awesome story. That's cool. But I would like go back to your story about the lamb, your lamb story, as you call it.
Yes.
One of the things that impressed me about that, like when I was going, we used a book at a church I was at, and it was called Living Free. And it took you through getting rid of your spiritual strongholds and teaching you how to pray against them and rebuking and repenting. There were like these 4 R's: rebuke, repent, receive, and rebuild. But I can't remember the last one. But anyway, the first chapter was about original design. And we taught people, and of course I didn't write the book, but the book was written very well, and we set the foundation that everyone's born with an original design. God has a design for your life, whether what your gifts are going to be, what your destiny, where he's going to use you and whatnot, but mainly more about your personality and your strengths and stuff like that. And then we go into, first we would have people really speak in, like we would have people praying. And do you have a word for this person, after prayer, about what, if the Lord showed you any part of their original design. So we would speak into the person. But then after all that was done and people had a pretty good idea, and most of the time people would say, oh yeah, I used to, when I was a child, I did this, or when I was a child, or when I was a young teen, I always wanted to do that. I felt like the Lord was teaching me or putting that in me, so most of the time there was a connection between what the Lord was giving us for that person and that person coming in and saying, yeah, I agree with that because I remember. But what changes kind of the path of that person is some kind of injustice, woundedness, abandonment, whatever. I mean, lots of different things, betrayal, but those things change their direction. The hurt, the pain, the wounds change their direction, and those strongholds start forming and change them into a person that is not God's original design. And so, yeah, I can totally relate with that, because one time I remember just asking the Lord, I was praying and asking kind of, I mean, what you didn't ask, but what he showed you, I was asking, like, how do you see me? Like, I know how I see myself. I kind of know how my husband, what he thinks of me, how he sees me and what he thinks. And sometimes what he thinks is wrong. It's not how I see myself and that kind of thing. And the Lord just put into my mind a picture that was taken of me when I was 5 years old. It was my 5th birthday, and I'm sitting on my dad's lap, and I have my little paper crown on, and I have my pretty little flower dress on with a little white collar. It's like, and my shiny shoes, and that was my birthday. I was totally decked out in my best clothes for my birthday party. And of course I'm on my dad's lap, and the Lord just said, that is how I see but you're on my lap, you're sitting there on my lap, and you're just a child. You're just a little girl to me with your crown. You're my princess, and so those things, it was just like breaking. It was just, that picture was so special to me. And then to have the Lord just know that about me, and then take it and use it to say, that's how I see you. So, and I have other stories of other people, that I could tell that, and I'm asking, Lord, where were you when this happened? Or, I felt like I was alone. And the Lord would say, no, I was standing at the window. I was there. I was there helping you through that. And so it is amazing. It's very powerful. And I just want to encourage people to ask those questions of the Lord. Like, how do you see me? Because you may have a terrible opinion of yourself. You may have shame and guilt and all those things, but that's not how the Lord sees you. And he's willing to show you how he sees you, and to show you your original design and where that went skewed, where that got off track. And it wasn't your fault. It was the world that we live in, broken world.
Yeah.
And even when you were talking, I know you've got a big story, but the narcissist comes up a lot in different conversations I've had, and even like on social media, people talk about narcissism. And I really think the root of that is pride and arrogance, but it's also getting our eyes off the Lord. And I may be oversimplifying it, but it's putting myself as king of my own kingdom and taking my eyes off the Lord and his kingdom, or the lack of understanding that the Lord's on the throne and I'm not, and it's his kingdom I live in, not mine. And I think that as we get farther and farther from the Lord and from the truth of God's word, there will be more and more narcissistic personalities poking through and growing stronger. So that was just my 2 cents there. But
Yeah.
beautiful story, though.
Yeah. Well, that's just a little snapshot. But
Yeah. No.
so I like to ask people, who were you meant to be when the Father knit you together in your mother's womb? Who are you? You are not your trauma responses. And the addictions is only a maladaptive coping mechanism. So when I teach the roots of addiction, which is trauma, I like to point out the rules and the roles. So the rules are in dysfunctional families: don't talk, don't think, don't feel, don't trust. That is a perfect setup for addictions. And addictions aren't just, the Skid Row bum or someone out on the street shooting heroin. addiction can be religion,
Mm-hmm.
religious addictions. So I've seen this over and over, and I was guilty of it too. I put the plug in the jug, quit drinking, quit doing drugs, and picked up the scriptures, and I became critical, judgmental, pharisaical,
Right.
right? And it wasn't until I was studying alcoholism, studying in college, that I was directed to go to two AA meetings as part of the course in alcoholism. And I was so filled with pride. I was so filled with pride when I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sat there judging everybody. Well, you poor so and so, you're still craving alcohol. Y'all need Jesus,
Mm.
right? I'm better than you. I got Jesus. I don't crave alcohol anymore.
Yeah.
And the Father had to deal with me and my pride, and just because we quit doing drugs and alcohol or put down the pornography or whatever it is that you're using to numb out, to cope, and pick up the word does not mean that you are well. It does not mean that you are now a safe person.
Yeah. And
So the rule,
self-medicating can take a
yeah, it's
whole different, a variety of forms. So, yeah.
exactly. So the rules: don't talk, don't think, don't feel, don't trust. How is that being walked out within the Torah community? Don't talk about what's really going on. Don't think about your past. Don't talk, don't think, don't feel, don't trust. Don't trust anybody outside of the Torah community. I mean, I've had sisters come to me sobbing, sobbing, wanting me to make their abuser stop abusing them. And so when I've given them resources to the local domestic violence shelter, their response is, well, that's psycho, that's secular. I don't want any part of that. Well, I'll tell you, my experience has been going to secular domestic violence shelters and agencies. There are born again Christians that the Father has in those places to help people out of domestic abuse. And domestic abuse is not a broken arm and a black eye. There's all sorts of different types of domestic violence going on with one's mouth. I mean, you can annihilate a person with your mouth. So where we're at right now is I have a brand new website coming forth, and I'm really excited about it because it's going to be a type of hub. So there's partners joining with me. There's different speakers, writers, therapists coming to join me. There's going to be lots of resources. People can reach out to me and I can help them find resources for whatever they're struggling with. And once again, I'm hoping that we can get this Good Samaritan Leadership Conference put together. We're talking about doing a webinar,
Mm.
packaging it, and that way people can tap into it. If you want to support a women's retreats or the conference, or if you want to connect with me, you can find me at moderndaysamaritan.com. And I think you are going to post some of those
Yes, I will.
links. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll be able to go to my show notes on my website. You also talked actually had told me a little bit about Purim morning, and
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you. So part of my story is I didn't know who I was, right? Um, so some of us get stuck in the victim role,
mhm,
right? Well, we're not victims. We're supposed to be conquerors, more than conqueror through him, right?
right,
Victors. So going from victim to victor, well, part of that is knowing who I am. I had no clue who I was. And um, so I was asking the Father, so who am I? And so I kept, sounds really wacky. I kept like sensing in my inner person, my inner man, inner woman, that I was Jewish. I'm like, there's no Jewish people in my family. And ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to be like a gypsy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hippie gypsy. So my cousin and I lost contact, and we found each other on Facebook. And she said, by the way, did you know that my brother is a pastor in Israel, in Jerusalem?
Hmm.
So I reached out to him and we were interacting, and I can't say his name because he and his wife are very influential
Mm-hmm.
in Israel. And he wrote me on Purim morning, of all mornings, Purim morning. He said, oh, by the way, I thought you would like to know that I've been doing DNA and genealogy, and I found out that we're not German, we're Jewish.
Oh
And
my
our name was
goodness.
changed to protect our identity. And
Yeah, I can.
so I'm like, well, that's really interesting. And then I was talking to Dr. Stephen Pigeon one day, and I told him, I said, it's the weirdest thing. I've always wanted to be a gypsy. And he said, well, you do know that Roma gypsies are Jews, right? Because I told him the story that I just told you about my cousin and the DNA testing. And I thought that was really, really interesting because being raised a Seventh-day Adventist, we always had the Sabbath piece, but I was never a good Adventist because I always asked questions. One of the questions that I always asked is, why are we not keeping the feast days?
Yeah, I was
And I was,
wondering about that.
yeah, and I always heard from people, oh, that's for the Jews. And I would look up the scriptures and I would show them that's not what the word says. The word says it's for all the children of Israel, for all generations.
And the
So the
Lord's
Holy,
feast, not Jewish feasts.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting because the Father wants us to know who we are. He wants to know our gifts, our talents, who He created us to be so that we can walk out our calling, walk out our assignments. We
Mm.
can flow
Yes,
in who He created us to be.
absolutely. And so Purim it's kind of not one of the main feasts, but it's a celebration based on what happened in the book of Esther and the saving of Judah, basically from Haman and from the law that was decreed to destroy them. So they celebrate, they remember and celebrate that. So in case you don't know what Purim is, but that's an amazing story because I know that, and it's not a big deal. Like I'm Irish, and so but when I look at my DNA, that because I was having actually some doctor test, and they thought they wanted to test my DNA. They wanted to test to see if there was anything missing or wrong, and so when it came back, it was from 23andMe, which is ancestry.com, and so I also got my whole ancestry kind of feedback as well as my DNA feedback, but that yeah, so it came back that I was mainly from the British Isles, is all of that. And they kind of lump like Ireland and Great Britain together, but it's kind of in that area. But the other thing that came back was like I'm like 1% Jewish. So somewhere along the line there was a Jewish relative in my line, in my blood. So I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, but one of the most eye-opening things I learned, and you probably know this because you mentioned it, but when Paul talks about we're not circumcised, we're not uncircumcised, neither of those matter. We're not Jew, we're not Gentile. what he's really saying, and in Galatians even goes further. It says, you are a new creation. You are the Israel of God. So we're not Jew, we're not Gentile, we're not male, we're not female. We're actually a new creation that he calls Israel. And when we think about it in those terms, his chosen people is Israel, and we're included in that when we follow Messiah. And I think that was just eye-opening, totally eye-opening for me, because now I go back and I read things in the Old Testament that says, tell Israel, like, dot dot dot, tell Israel this, tell Israel that. I have to include myself then in what he's telling Israel, because now I'm considered part of that family. I've been adopted in. I've been grafted into Israel, not grafted into Judaism, grafted into Israel. I am one of God's chosen people. And again, just to be clear, we're not putting Israel aside and saying, that whole replacement theology stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not, that's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about. We don't take their place. We join them. Those who
Yeah.
believe in Messiah, no matter what your nationality is, whether you're Jew, whether you're Gentile, we are all considered Israel now. And that's why we keep the feasts. That's why we do what we do, because we're keeping God's feasts. So his holidays. And I think that's just very, it's just very eye-opening, I think. And we both have had conversations with Jim Staley and his identity crisis. And I was explaining this to a friend. I mean, the church is in an identity crisis. They don't know who they are.
Exactly. I mean, that's what was going on with me, is identity crisis. I had no idea. I mean, I knew how people labeled me all through my life, right? I knew that identity that they were trying to assign to me, but I wanted to know who I really was and what my real identity was.
Yes.
And so it gave me some I don't even know the word, a foundation, because I had such a faulty foundation. That it gave me a sense of security, because I had no security. Our security is in Yeshua HaMashiach. We're saved through his blood, not the bloodlines. We're saved through the blood of Yeshua. But the prophecies do tell us that right before the Messiah returns, he will be calling his tribes back to the ancient paths, right? So my theory is, for whatever, whatever it's worth, I kind of lean towards he knows whose ancestors was there at Mount Sinai when they said I do to his Torah, right? And Hasatan's been following our bloodline, our ancestors, all through the ages, and he knows who's who, right?
Wow, that's incredible. That's an incredible thought, really. It's like somebody in our past, thousands of years ago, was standing there at Mount Sinai, and they said yes, because a lot of people don't know that, really understand that story, because God did ask each person, the way that it's written in Hebrew, he asked each person, will you obey these commandments? And they had to answer yes or no. And so, if one of our descendants answered yes, he's been keeping, that's a great thought. Really. So never thought about that.
When I was early into this journey, this walk, and I started realizing all of this, I just want to cry. I would say to him, and look at how many people have overdosed. I used to shoot drugs. How many people overdose? How many women are dead they beaten to death. I mean, I had a boyfriend that used to beat me terrible. I'd be in the hospital, in the ER because he beat me so bad. One night he took a gun out. He was going to kill me. And so, I have a really long, rough story. I'm a miracle. I'm a walking miracle. And I would say to the Father, why did you keep me alive? Why did you call my name? Why did you call me out of the dark? And this is what he said to me. It's not about you. I'm a promise keeper. I'm a covenant keeping Yahweh. And I promised your ancestors when they said I do, I promised that I would save. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but he was keeping his covenant. He was keeping his covenant by calling me because of my ancestors saying, I do. I mean, that's so powerful.
Because there was a wedding going on Mount Sinai.
Yeah. Amen. And so I tell people, right, we're on this journey to the heart of our Father, and on the journey to the heart of the Father, we are preparing for the great wedding feast. And we're preparing our wedding attire. And I'm still on that journey, and I have spots and wrinkles on the back of my wedding dress, and I need truth tellers to come alongside of me and people who I know love me, that have sown into my life, and they can come alongside of me and say, yo, Laura Lee, I see a spot and a wrinkle on the back of your wedding dress. Can I help you remove that spot and that wrinkle? Because that's what we're supposed to be doing, is coming alongside of each other and helping one another, encouraging one another. And, we all have gifts, we all have talents, we all have a calling, we all have a ministry. I know some women who their ministry is hospitality. They have cooking skills. I'm not a great cook, but I sure do appreciate it when they cook good meals. We all have gifts and talents. Some people, their gifting is organization. Some people are gifted financially. One of the things with the parable of the Good Samaritan is I like to ask people, who are you in this parable? Are you a leader? Are you one of the leaders that are leaving someone bloodied in the road? And are you walking, crossing to the other side because you don't want to deal with this person? Are you one of the leaders that are saying, well, what did you do to cause your husband to beat you? What did you do to cause so-and-so to, X, Y, and Z? Or are you the person, the Samaritan, that's coming alongside of the person? And if you are a person that wants to come alongside and help, do you have triage skills? Do you know how to triage? Do you know how to do a simple assessment? If they're alcoholic, do you know where the local detox is? Because people can die from alcoholism, alcohol detox. Do you know where the local domestic violence shelter is? Do you know where the 12-step meetings are? Are you the innkeeper? Do you have means to help people? I personally know a lot of struggling single moms that have been put out by their husbands, and the Torah community is actually coddling those alcoholic, abusive husbands, but not helping the wives and, the children.
Yeah.
The women are struggling to put food on the table and to pay the rent.
We don't have time to open a whole new conversation on that, but but there's that whole thing that men are right. It's the woman's fault. The man's just exerting his authority, and that kind of thing, and that very misogynist view that is really taken over the world, to silence women, to put them in their place, so to speak, the place that they think is their place, not, of course, the place that God has for them. And yeah, that's just a scary part of our society. I mean, it's bad enough when you see the women in some of these Arab countries having to totally cover up every piece of skin they have and not even look human behind those what are they? Hijabs or yeah.
I don't know what they're called.
Is a hijab or something. I might have the word wrong, but and then we have it going on in the United States within the body of Messiah, and women being told to be silent because they see that word in the Bible, but they don't recognize that word is used for 3 different groups: women who are speaking out of turn, who are being a distraction, women and people who are gifted with tongues and people who are gifted with prophecy are all told to be silent and not be a distraction when someone else is teaching. And we take it out of context and we use it against women and tell them to be silent, but we don't tell the prophets and the speakers of tongues to be silent in turn when it's not their turn to speak. So you have to take things in context and you have to understand God's heart. And I think that we really, as a people, don't always pay attention to what God's heart is for people and God's compassion. And that's the first word he uses to describe himself in Exodus. So Exodus, 34, I think he says, I'm compassionate, merciful, long-suffering. He doesn't start out with saying, I'm judgmental. I'm going to put you in your place. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to silence you. That's not how he described himself. So
I love the example of the woman at the well.
Mm-hmm.
The woman at the well, and how he went out of his way to meet this woman in the heat of the day at the well, and he told her all about herself, right? And he didn't shame her, he didn't condemn her, and I look at it as a therapy session with Jesus. They had a therapy session at the well.
They did.
And so she ended up an evangelist.
Yeah. He was the first one. She was the first one he disclosed that he was the Messiah too. So
to a woman who'd had how many husbands?
Yeah.
That's why I love the story, because I know how I've been treated all my life, and
they were masters. That word. I did a whole podcast on that woman at the well with Lauren Cruz, and she describes that the word Jesus used is about a master, not a loving husband, but a master who lorded over her. Those were her husbands. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I appreciate you telling your story and being so transparent, and you have a wonderful testimony, and you brought up some absolutely amazing points, and so I appreciate all that.
Thank you so much. I love sharing what he's done. It's his story. I'm just his vessel. And I love, it just amazes me how, I know where I've come from, right? I know where I've been. I know where I've come from. And he saved me for such a time as this to reach out to other people who feel ashamed and abandoned and rejected and outcast, to come alongside of them and have the honor and the privilege of hearing their story without judgment, without condemning. Who am I to judge or condemn? I mean, I have a wild, wild story, but to be used by him as an instrument of healing, to show them a better way, to show them the path of healing, of restoration, of regeneration. And it's all about him. It's his story and his people. And he is desperately trying to heal his children so that we can walk together, man, woman, equal,
Yeah.
different, yes, created different, different gifts,
Yeah.
different callings, but to walk together and have each other's back with love and respect of one another,
Amen.
flowing in the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yes. So
Amen.
true. And, the one who had the power to condemn the adulterous woman said, I do not condemn you. Go and sin no more.
Amen.
So who are we to condemn when he could have? Thank you. Thank you so much. This was fantastic.